Hey guys, welcome to part 3 in this Bitcoin Cash wallet tutorial. In this video, we will be implementing our UI's logic in order to handle all the actions from our users, and at the same time we will be defining the interface for our wallet module. At the end of this video, our work on the UI will be complete and we'll be set and ready to start writing some Bitcoin Cash code and implementing our wallet. So that's it for the intro, and let's jump right into it. First of all, I'm gonna open the editor where we left off on the previous video. This is the state of the index.js file that we had here. I'm gonna refresh the page just to see where we left off. Here we can see in the console on the right how we were printing the bitcore and the fetch function. And we have the hi there from the console log. Now we're gonna, the first thing that we're gonna do is we're actually gonna find all the UI elements that we created in our HTML, and we're going to reference them from JavaScript so that we can start adding some listeners and handling their contents. So I'm going to open the index.html file, and I'm going to fetch all those IDs that we created on the previous video. I'm going to get all those IDs. And now that I have them, I go to index.js. I'm going to create variables for the DOM elements from all these IDs. By ID, these are the IDs. These are not valid variable names, so I need to update this just for a second. I'm gonna remove this from here. And there we go. These are all the elements that we define in our HTML. I also need to grab those inputs that are defined by their names. And I have to do a similar process. So I'm going to turn these into variable names and document.get elements by name. These are their names. In this case, the function getElementsByName returns an array because there may be multiple elements with the same name. So in this case, I need to add the item 0 in the end, which just tells the array to return the first element. So I'm going to group these logically according to where they belong and in the order of the sections that we defined. First of all, the balance display, then the deposit display. I have a typo here. I just noticed this is the deposit address display. I might have the same here, yep, in the HTML. Fixing that now. Now, then after this comes the withdrawal form and the withdrawal address and amount, which are all grouped together. After that, we have the import form, which has the private key as part of it, and then the export button and the private key display. Now, everything is sorted according to the order in which they appear in the UI. And now we're going to start adding some logic to these elements. First of all, the new wallet that we're creating up here, I'm going to set it into a variable. And now I'm going to, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the contents of the balance display to the actual wallet's balance. So I'm going to define here a function which doesn't exist yet, which is getBalance. In the case of the deposit address, it's pretty much the same. So I'm going to do getDepositAddress. Next step, I have the withdrawal form, which is a form, and to it we're going to add an event listener for the submit event. We're going to add a function here which takes an event. In the case of forms, we need to call the preventDefault function on the event, because otherwise the default behavior on the browsers is to just essentially refresh the page, adding all the form itself as part of the request. So, but we don't want to do that now. We want to handle everything without refreshing the page. So in this case, when the user clicks on the submit button on the withdrawal form, what we actually want here to happen is we want to create a withdrawal from the wallet. So I'm going to write wallet.withdraw, and we're going to pass in the value of both of these elements, which represents the value that is actually in the inputs by the time that this code is executing. Now this withdraw function is where we actually go ahead and implement the wallet. Is actually going to create a transaction and broadcast it to the network. So it seems like a good idea to actually display the transaction ID for the transaction that gets created as part of the withdrawal. So here I'm going to write a new variable var txid, and now we're just going to add some alert message so that the user can get some feedback of what's going on. I'm just going to add this join here and add a space. So that looks just fine. Next step, we have the import form. We also need to add the listener on the submit event. We need to do the same thing with the event by preventing the default behavior. And whenever the import form gets submitted, we're not really gonna do anything with this right now. We're just gonna leave it here, and we're gonna print the value of the private key input. The next step is we're gonna add an event listener on the export button on the event click. So this will get executed every time that the user clicks on the export button. Now in this case, we can actually go ahead and implement this logic already by just putting the essentially just toggling the show and hide status of that part of the UI. So what we need to do first is we need to actually check if the display itself is shown or hidden. So this is the way that we get the actual contents of that span. I'm going to check if the span currently has the string hidden as part of its inner text. That means that it is currently hidden, and what we actually want to display instead is the wallet's private key. So I'm going to create a new function here, which is wallet.getPrivateKey, and in the other case, which means that the private key display does not have the text hidden, that means that the actual private key is being displayed. So we actually want to go back to hidden. So we've essentially defined the behavior for all of the UI components that we had created on the previous video. The deposit address display is not being used. This is probably a typo. No, it's just my editor has some wrong. I'm going to reopen this file. There it goes. So the behavior for all the UI elements that we created on the previous video is now mostly defined. Of course, the wallet's functions are not really defined. All of these functions, we're going to add mocks for them on the wallet to make sure that we can run the code and see something on the UI. So the way we do this is we're going to add these functions to the prototype of wallet. The only one of these functions that has any arguments is the withdraw function, which takes an address and a value. And we're not going to do anything interesting with these yet. We're just going to return a string with the name of the function. In the case of withdraw, we also want to see the actual arguments that are getting passed in. And I'm going to remove these things that we had up there. And now this pretty much defines the full interface for our wallet module. So I'm gonna refresh the page and see if everything that we just wrote is actually working. So the first thing that we notice here is the balance section has get balance satoshis. That makes sense because this is the data that we're retrieving from the wallet, which is just the string get balance. In the case of the deposit address, we're still seeing the loading. That means that something went wrong. Let's see what happened. Let's go back to the HTML. And the deposit address is here, which has a loading sign in it. Then when we're actually loading the page, we retrieve the deposit address display. Let me check there's not any typos there. In the case of the deposit address display, we're not actually setting it to the inner text, but just rewriting the variable. That's where the error is. Now let's refresh the page, and now everything is okay. We have get balance satoshis and get deposit here. That means that the data is correctly being retrieved from the wallet module mockup. In the case of the withdrawal, I'm gonna put some address here and some amount, and I'm gonna click on withdraw. So the transaction ID that's being returned as a mock from our module is withdraw and the value of the two arguments. That seems to be working as well. In the case of the import export, if we add anything here and we click on import, we're just printing the value in that field. We're not doing anything with it yet. In this case, let's see also if the show and hide button actually works. That seems to be working perfectly fine. It's toggling between the hidden state and the value which is being returned from the wallet. So that means that the UI logic for all of our UI is now complete. The only thing that is missing is to actually implement all these functions that we created while we were hooking up the UI. And this is it for part 3. We will start in part 4 to write some actual Bitcoin Cash code, and we're going to start implementing our wallet. So see you in part 4.